This is Ralph Sass, and this is Accounting 212, Chapter 5, second part of the lecture on Chapter 5. Continuing on, okay, we can do a whole bunch of things by looking at what happens if we change commissions or change items, and so let's look at one more yet. They pay a 15% sales commission per bike instead of paying them flat salaries of $6,000 a month, and it increases sales from 500 to 575. Okay, couple of quick notes here. Since we're paying a sales commission, my variable expenses are going to go up by $15, and my fixed expenses, my salaries, are going to go down by $6,000. Okay, and the number of bikes obviously are going up. So notice what happens here. My variable expenses have gone up. My variable expenses have gone up. My fixed costs have gone down by $6,000. Total profit went up to $32,375. Is that worth it? In my opinion, the answer is yes. But all of a sudden, by setting things up in variable expense, fixed expense, it becomes very easy to analyze some of these situations that occur. Next question, and this often also comes up in the business world, is somebody will come to you and say, hey, I want a special deal, I want a special price, and what's the lowest price you can give me, or what have you. Notice they have an opportunity in this case to sell 150 bikes to a wholesaler without disturbing sales to others, okay, other customers or fixed expenses. What price would you quote if you wanted to increase by $3,000? Okay, well, first thing to realize is you got to cover all your variable expenses plus $3,000 more on 150 bikes. Okay, means an extra $20 per bike. And notice how they went ahead and did that. $3,000 divided by 150 bikes is $20 per bike. Variable expenses are $300, so the selling price that would be required would be a minimum of $320. And that would increase my profit by $3,000, cover all my expenses, and it wouldn't change my sales in any other way. Okay? And there is the proof from an income statement perspective. A lot of times businesses try to figure out what would I need to earn perhaps a target profit. And once again, there's the equation method or the formula method. For those of you that have had me in other classes, I like the formula method, okay, as opposed to the equation method. They're both going to get us to the same spot, so let's go ahead and take a look at how we can calculate those. Okay. If we want to figure out what the using the equation method, okay, what we would do is we'd put a profit in for Q. We'd put a number in for our target profit over here, $10,000 or whatever the number is, and then what we would do is solve for Q. Okay, so let's take a look at how this works. Suppose that they wanted to earn a target profit of $100,000. What we would do is we'd put the $100,000 in for our target profit. Okay, put the $100,000 in for our target profit. Our contribution margin is still $200. Our fixed expenses are still $80, and we'd solve for Q. And so now, doing some simple algebra there, what do we get? We get $900. What we would have to do is we'd have to sell 900 bikes. Note that is per unit. Those are number of units, not dollars. Okay, those are units, not dollars. Now, this is my preferred method only because it to me is a little bit easier. What I do is I take my target profit, add to it my fixed expenses, and divide it by my contribution margin per unit, and that'll tell me the unit sales. Okay, kind of simplifies that and makes sure I don't have to do some of that algebra. So notice what happens. Using the same number, $100,000, put $100,000 plus $80,000 divided by 20, divided by 200, which is the contribution margin per unit, and it tells me my unit sales need to be $900. Or, excuse me, 900 units. Okay? We can also compute the target profit in terms of sales dollars. What we were doing in the last one was doing units. We can also do it in terms of sales dollars. Once again, either method will get us there. Once again, I prefer the formula, but I'll show you both. Okay. Suppose in this case our goal is to solve for sales. Okay. And so notice what we're going to do. Now, in this particular case, what we're going to do is instead of solving for Q, we're going to solve for sales. And what's going to go in there is that 40%, which is our contribution margin ratio. Okay, so by using that percentage, we can go ahead and, rather than the dollars, if we use dollars, we get units. If we use the contribution margin ratio, we get dollars. And once again, we can do it the same way with the formula method, target profit plus fixed expenses. My numerator stays the same, only difference is in the denominator I put the contribution margin ratio, which in this case is 40%, and what it tells me is my sales need to be $450,000 in order to earn $100,000. Once again, this is the coffee clutch. If my target profit is $2,500, my fixed expenses are $1,300 divided by the unit contribution margin, which is $1.13, means that I have to sell 3,363 cups in order to earn my target profit. Okay, I can also do it in terms of the contribution margin ratio. Contribution margin ratio was 0.758. Remember, we calculated that earlier in video number 1. So if I take the 3,800 divided by 0.78, it means I need sales dollars of 5,011. Okay, so now we can use these methods to also calculate break-evens. The key to break-even is break-even means that profits are 0. So all we need to do is substitute in, instead of earning a target profit, we put a 0 in there and solve the equation, and we'll get 400 bikes, which is exactly the number we had before. We can also use the formula method. Okay, notice we no longer have in the numerator now, it was profit plus fixed expenses. Profit is 0, so it goes away. So just taking fixed expenses divided by contribution margin will get us a unit sales of 400. I can also do it in terms of dollars by putting a percent in the contribution margin ratio in there. And if I put the contribution margin ratio in there, what does it give me? It gives me sales dollars. So once again, this is in dollars. I can also calculate it in units. Quick note, I can always switch from sales to units. Okay, if those are my sales, and I know that I'm selling each unit for $500, I can take 200 grand divided by $500, because that's how much I'm selling each bike for, and I will get my 400 bikes. So once I've calculated it in either dollars or units, it's easy to convert it to the others. The only exception I would make to that, or the only thing I'd be careful of, is make sure you know if you're getting dollars out or units, because you don't want to say your break-even point is $200 when it's 200 units, or vice versa. You can also set it up this way. Notice in the denominator they put the contribution margin ratio. They put the 40% down there. Dollar sales now are 200 grand. Once again, you can easily convert that to units if so desired. And once again, what's their break even in sales dollars? Fixed expenses are 1,300. Contribution margin percent was 0.758. We've calculated that before. So they would have to sell $1,715 worth of coffee during the week, month, what have you, in order to break even. I prefer to think in terms of profit because I prefer to think I'm not trying to break even, but I'm trying to earn a profit. And likewise, I can figure out how many cups of coffee that is by taking my fixed expenses, my 1,300, dividing it by my $1.13 contribution margin per unit, and that tells me I have to sell 1,150 cups of coffee. Some companies take a look at what we call a margin of safety, okay? And a margin of safety is kind of how much can sales go down by and I still break even, okay? So what the margin of safety is asking me or telling me is, hey, how much can sales go down by in order to still break even? So let's take a look at their margin of safety. And the margin of safety in this case is 50 grand. We usually talk about it in terms of dollars, okay? We could also think about it in terms of units. Units, it's 100 units or $50,000. So their margin of safety is, in this case, 50 grand. Another way to look at it, it can also be expressed as a percent of sales. In this particular case, sales could fall by 20%, and we would still break even. Notice how they got that. They took the margin of safety of 50 grand, divided it by their sales of 250 grand, and that tells them that sales could fall by 20%, i.e. go from 500 to 400 units, go from 250 to 200 grand, and they would still break even. Okay, margin of safety, I already mentioned, can be measured in number of bikes or in dollar terms. Companies do this both ways. There's not a right way or a wrong way. It's just some companies do it by, the number of cups of coffee. Others do it by dollars. There is a lot to be said, and I've alluded to this in earlier discussion. There is a lot to be said for cost structure and profit stability. Depending upon how you structure your business between fixed and variable costs, okay, determines your cost structure and your profit stability. One of the big factors in the automakers' problems, especially in the recession of 2007, 2008, 2009, was they have huge fixed costs. What's happened is the labor unions have negotiated pay deals for their union employees predominantly that took a variable cost, which should have been a variable cost, labor costs, turned it into a fixed cost. And what that means is their profits tend to be very volatile because they're very subject to what happens with sales. It's also the reason why a lot of times when sales back off, they offer all those rebates and discounts and what have you, because to the extent they produce all those cars, they have all those fixed costs. They have to absorb them, and so it's better for them to cut the price by giving you a rebate or what have you, and sell all those vehicles. So notice, and this is just kind of a summary, there are advantages and disadvantages to both. If you have a high fixed cost structure, income will be higher in good years than with companies with low cost. The disadvantage is it's going to be lower in bad years compared to companies with a lower proportion of fixed cost. This is what kills the automakers when sales back off. Because they have these high fixed costs, their net income tends to plummet in bad years. So what happens is companies with low fixed cost structures enjoy greater income stability across all years. So to the extent you have more variable costs, your income's not going to be as volatile. Keep in mind, if I want to show my shareholders I'm such a great manager, when sales are good, what I want is I want really high fixed costs, because then when sales are good, I'm going to be able to go to my shareholders and my boss and whatever and say, gosh, aren't I the smartest guy in the world? Because profits have just skyrocketed. When in reality, the reason why it did that was because of my cost structure. And when sales deteriorate, I'm going to get pummeled for those decisions. One other term is a term called operating leverage, degree of operating leverage. And what this tells us is it's a measure of how sensitive net income is to percentage changes in sales. Okay? And it's calculated by taking the contribution margin and dividing it by net income. So in this particular case, the contribution margin is 100 grand. Okay, the contribution margin is 100 grand. Net income is 20, so we take 100 over 20, and our degree of operating leverage is 5. What that tells us is that if sales go up by 10%, if sales go up by 10%, net income will go up by 50%. So, if net income goes up by 10%, or pardon me, if sales go up by 10%, net income is going to go up by 50%. How do I get that? Just 10 times 5 is 50, that degree of operating leverage. And notice the verification. It's hard to believe, okay? But this is the verification. Sales went up by 10%. 10% of 500 is 50 bikes, so they sold 50 more bikes. And what happened to net income? Net income went from 20 grand to 30 grand, which is an increase of 50%. 10%, or 10 grand, pardon me, is how much it went up, divided by 20 grand, the starting point. Quick note, that's how you always calculate a percentage increase. What was the change divided by what was the starting point? So how much did sales go up by? Or pardon me, how much did net income go up by? It went up by 50%. Notice, going back to my coffee cup example, my degree of operating leverage is 2.21, okay, by taking my contribution margin divided by my net income. And what that 2.21 tells me is that if sales go up by 20%, net income will go up by 44.2%. Just gives you an example of how leveraged companies are to sales, depending upon how their cost structure is set up. We can also start to take a look at how we can compensate our salespeople or what have you, and it can lead to lower profits, as the example is here. It can also lead to higher profits, depending upon how they're structured. So notice what we have here. They have the XR7, which sells for $100, okay, and generates a contribution margin of 25 bucks per unit. The Turbo sells for $150 and has a contribution margin of 18. Okay, they're compensated based upon sales commissions. Notice what's going to happen. Okay, if they're based upon sales contribution, you may want to. The point of this is you may want to put yourself in a situation where, since it's selling for $100 and generating $25 in contribution margin, and this product is selling for $150 and generating only $18, you may want to pay more commission on selling that XR7 than selling this this Turbo. Why? Because the contribution margin is not as much. So you can start to structure your sales commissions to look at which is the more profitable product for you, and encouraging your salesman, if you will, to sell the more profitable product. Now, there is a complication to all of this, okay? And sales mix, figuring out the break-even point for a company like Walmart is, I don't want to say impossible, but very difficult. Why? Because they have a sales mix. They have a lot of different products they're selling in there, from tires to food to fishing supplies to clothing, and different products have different selling prices and different contribution margins. Groceries typically have one of the lowest contribution margins there are. So to the extent they sell more, they have more sales of groceries, it doesn't necessarily lead to a higher net income. In fact, you could see sales go up and net income go down depending upon what your sales mix is. And just to show you how this might work, okay, notice in this particular case we've got bicycles and carts that they're selling, okay. They each have different contribution margins. In general, their contribution margin is 48.2%. Okay, but the issue is very simple. If this company sold a lot more carts and a lot fewer bicycles, even though their total sales were the same, is it very possible that their net income would go up? And the answer is yes. Okay, it's very possible that their net income would go up. In a multi-product break-even, if we want to figure out the dollar sales, notice what they did here. They used the 48.2%. Where'd they get that 48.2? They got it from right there. Let me see if I can highlight it quick. They got it from right there. But notice if they'd have sold more carts and fewer bikes, that percentage would have changed, would have gotten closer to 55%, and it would have changed. But notice, based upon that contribution margin ratio of 48.2, what's their break-even point? $352,697, assuming their product mix doesn't change. If their product mix changes, okay, if their product mix changes, then their break-even will change. Some key assumptions, okay? Key assumptions. 1, selling price is constant. Okay. 2, costs are linear, i.e. straight line, and can be easily divided into variable and fixed elements. Not always possible. In multi-product companies, the sales mix is constant. That's almost never the case. Okay. It's almost never the case. So what happens then is your break-even point is going to change. Okay. And finally, in manufacturing companies, when you're figuring break-even, you've got to make the assumption that inventories don't change, i.e. units produced and units sold are equal. Not a huge stretch if you're doing just in time, but it is much more of a stretch if you do maintain inventories. That concludes the lecture for this chapter. As always, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.